Sarah Martinez stood at the back of the training room, her small frame barely visible among the tall, muscular recruits who surrounded her. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the military facility, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. She clutched her training manual tightly, her knuckles white with tension. This was her first day at the elite operations training program, and already she could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging, questioning, doubting. The instructor, Commander Blake, a man with a voice like thunder and a reputation for breaking even the strongest candidates, stood at the front of the room. He scanned the crowd of 50 recruits, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. When his gaze landed on Sarah, he paused for just a moment longer than necessary. She could see the skepticism written across his weathered face. Behind her, she heard the whispers starting. 2 male recruits were talking, not even bothering to lower their voices. Did they really let her in? Look at her. She's tiny. She'll be gone by the end of the week. The other one laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air. I give her 3 days maximum. This program eats people twice her size for breakfast. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept her eyes forward. She had heard it all before. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 110 pounds, she had spent her entire life being underestimated. Teachers had discouraged her from joining the school track team. Her own family had questioned her decision to join the military. Friends had called her crazy when she applied for this elite program, one that had a 90% failure rate and was known for producing some of the finest special operations agents in the world. Commander Blake began speaking, his voice filling every corner of the room. Welcome to hell, he said simply. For the next 6 months, you will be pushed beyond every limit you thought you had. You will question why you came here. You will want to quit. Most of you will quit. He walked slowly between the rows of recruits, his boots echoing on the floor. This program is designed to find the 1%. The elite. The ones who can think clearly when everything is falling apart. The ones who can survive when survival seems impossible. He stopped near Sarah and she could feel his presence like a physical weight. Some of you are here because you're strong. Some because you're fast. Some because you think you're smart. He paused, looking directly at her. But strength fades. Speed fails. And intelligence means nothing if you don't have the will to use it when you're exhausted, scared, and alone. The first week was brutal beyond anything Sarah had imagined. Every morning began at 4 a.m. with a 10-mile run through the mountains surrounding the facility. The male recruits surged ahead, their longer legs eating up the distance while Sarah struggled to keep pace. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. When she finally crossed the finish line, usually among the last 5 recruits, she would see the smirks, hear the muttered comments. She's slowing everyone down, someone said during a water break on the 3rd day. They should cut her loose now and save us all the trouble. The physical training was relentless. Obstacle courses with walls that seemed impossibly high. Rope climbs that left her hands raw and bleeding. Combat drills where she was paired against men who outweighed her by 80 or 90 pounds. Time after time she was thrown to the mat, knocked down, overpowered. The laughter from the sidelines grew louder with each failure, but Sarah noticed something the others didn't. While they relied on their strength and size, she was learning. She watched how the instructors moved, how they used leverage and timing instead of brute force. During hand-to-hand combat training, she started anticipating attacks, using her opponent's momentum against them. It didn't always work, but slowly, very slowly, she began to improve. The classroom sessions were different. Here, Sarah found her footing. They studied strategy, learned about different terrains and climates, memorized protocols and procedures. While some of the larger recruits dozed off during the lectures, struggling to stay awake after the physical demands of the morning, Sarah absorbed every word. She took detailed notes, asked questions, stayed late to study the maps and scenarios. One evening, during a tactical planning exercise, the instructors divided them into teams. Sarah was placed with 3 male recruits who made their displeasure immediately clear. Great, one of them muttered. We got stuck with the dead weight. The exercise required them to plan a theoretical rescue mission in hostile territory. They had 2 hours to develop a strategy, considering enemy positions, terrain challenges, extraction points, and backup plans. Sarah's teammates immediately started arguing about the best approach, each one trying to dominate the conversation with louder voices and more aggressive postures. Sarah studied the map quietly, tracing routes with her finger, calculating distances and times in her head. Finally, she spoke up. What if we approach from the north instead? Everyone expects an attack from the south because it's more direct. But look at this valley here. It provides natural cover, and there's a river we could use to mask our movement. Her teammates barely glanced at her suggestion. That would take too long, one dismissed. We need speed, not some complicated detour. They submitted their plan, a straightforward assault that relied on overwhelming force. Sarah had tried to point out the flaws, the gaps in their strategy, but they hadn't listened. When Commander Blake reviewed all the team plans the next day, he tore theirs apart in front of everyone. This plan would get your entire team killed in the first 10 minutes, he said flatly. Then his eyes found Sarah. Martinez, I saw your notes. Show us your alternative. Sarah stood, her heart pounding, and walked to the front. She explained her northern approach, detailing how they could use the terrain, how the longer route actually provided better security, how they could establish multiple fallback positions. When she finished, the room was silent. Commander Blake nodded slowly. That's the kind of thinking that keeps people alive. Her teammates didn't thank her. Instead, the resentment grew stronger. She was making them look bad, they said. She was trying to show off. The whispers in the hallways grew more pointed. During training exercises, she found herself excluded from informal study groups. At meals, seats would mysteriously be taken when she approached a table. Sarah ate alone most nights, reviewing her notes, preparing for the next day. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to prove something, though she wasn't entirely sure anymore if she was proving it to them or to herself. Every morning she woke up sore and exhausted. Every morning she considered quitting. And every morning she laced up her boots and went back out to face another day of mockery and doubt. By the end of the first month, 15 recruits had dropped out. Sarah wasn't one of them. She had survived, but survival wasn't enough. She needed to excel. The real challenges, she sensed, were still ahead. The second month of training brought a new level of intensity that separated the determined from the desperate. The instructors introduced survival training, dropping small groups of recruits into the wilderness with minimal supplies and vague coordinates for extraction points. Sarah found herself assigned to a group with 4 men who had made it clear they considered her presence a liability. The helicopter dropped them in a dense forest at dawn. They had 3 days to reach the extraction point 40 miles away, navigating through unfamiliar terrain with only a compass, a basic map, and limited rations. The group leader, a recruit named Marcus who stood well over 6 feet tall, immediately took charge. He studied the map for barely 30 seconds before pointing in a direction. This way. We move fast, we take the straight path, we get out of here ahead of schedule. Sarah looked at her own map, noting the elevation changes Marcus was ignoring. That route goes straight through a mountain pass. It might look shorter on the map, but the climb will slow us down significantly. If we go around through the valley, it's actually faster. Marcus didn't even look at her. We're not adding extra miles because you're worried about a little climbing. Keep up or stay behind. The other 3 men fell in line behind him, and Sarah had no choice but to follow. The first day was grueling. Marcus set a brutal pace, trying to prove his strength and endurance. They climbed steadily upward, the temperature dropping as they gained elevation. By afternoon, dark clouds had rolled in, and Sarah felt the first drops of rain. She called out a warning. We should find shelter. This looks like it could get bad. It's just a little rain, Marcus shot back. What are you, afraid of getting wet? Within an hour, the rain had become a downpour. The mountain path turned slippery and treacherous. The temperature continued to drop, and Sarah could see her breath in the cold air. They were all soaked through, shivering, and the light was fading fast. Finally, even Marcus had to admit they needed to stop. They found a small overhang of rock that provided minimal shelter from the rain. As night fell and the temperature dropped further, the reality of their situation became clear. No one had thought to keep their fire-starting materials dry. Their clothes were soaked, and hypothermia was becoming a real danger. The men huddled together, teeth chattering, blaming each other for their poor planning. Sarah had been quiet, but she had also been observant. During a brief break earlier in the day before the rain started, she had collected dry moss and small twigs, storing them in a waterproof pocket of her pack. She had learned this trick from studying survival manuals late at night while others slept. Now she pulled out the materials and began carefully building a small fire, using the friction method she had practiced dozens of times. The men watched in silence as a small flame caught, then grew. Sarah carefully fed it with the dry materials, then gradually added slightly damp wood, letting the heat dry it enough to burn. Within 20 minutes, they had a real fire. The warmth was immediate and life-saving. Marcus stared at the flames, then at Sarah, but said nothing. Pride, she realized, was a powerful thing. The next morning, Marcus was sick. The cold and wet had gotten to him, and he was running a fever. He tried to hide it, pushing himself to stand and lead, but he was clearly struggling. One of the other recruits, a man named Jackson, suggested they rest for half a day to let Marcus recover. Sarah checked their map and timeline. "We don't have half a day if we want to make the extraction point on time. We've already lost time taking the mountain route." She looked at Marcus, who was leaning against a tree, his face pale. "I can lead if you need to rest." The suggestion was met with immediate resistance. "We don't need you to lead," Jackson said sharply. "Marcus just needs an hour or two." But as the morning wore on, it became clear that Marcus wasn't improving. He was slowing them down considerably, stumbling on the path, needing frequent breaks. Finally, one of the quieter members of the group, a recruit named Chen, spoke up. "Maybe we should listen to her. She kept us alive last night with that fire." Reluctantly, the group agreed to let Sarah navigate. She chose a route that was longer in distance but easier terrain, keeping Marcus's condition in mind. She set a steady pace, not too fast but consistent, and she watched for sources of water and edible plants along the way. The training she had absorbed during those late-night study sessions was now proving invaluable. On the second night, they reached a river. The map showed they needed to cross it to reach the extraction point, but the recent rain had swollen the water level. The current was strong and dangerous. Jackson immediately started looking for a place to ford, choosing a spot where the river appeared shallowest. Sarah studied the river more carefully, walking up and down the bank. "Not there," she called out. "The current is strongest in the shallow parts. We need a deeper section where the water moves slower, and we need to cross at an angle, not straight across." Jackson laughed bitterly. "Now she's an expert on rivers, too. What's next? Are you going to teach us how to swim?" But Chen had come to stand beside her, looking at where she was pointing. "She's right. Look at how the water moves. The shallow part is faster and more dangerous." They crossed at Sarah's chosen spot, helping each other through the chest-deep water, angling downstream as she had suggested. It was cold and exhausting, but they all made it across safely. When they reached the other side, even Jackson muttered a grudging, "Good call." On the third day, they were making good time on Sarah's route when they heard something that made them all freeze. Voices. According to the training scenario, there were instructors playing enemy forces in the area, and getting captured meant automatic failure of the exercise. Sarah immediately signaled for everyone to get low and quiet. The voices were getting closer. Marcus, still weak from his illness, was breathing heavily, and Sarah worried the sound would give them away. She motioned for the group to follow her, leading them in a wide circle away from the voices, using the terrain to mask their movement. She moved slowly, carefully, placing each foot deliberately to avoid snapping branches or rustling leaves. They traveled like this for over an hour, barely making any forward progress but successfully avoiding detection. When they finally stopped to rest, Jackson looked at her with something that might have been respect. "How did you know how to do that?" "I paid attention during the stealth training sessions," Sarah said simply. While everyone else was complaining about having to crawl through the mud, they reached the extraction point with 3 hours to spare. The helicopter was waiting, and Commander Blake stood beside it, checking his watch. When he saw Sarah's group emerge from the tree line, all 5 members present and accounted for, he nodded in approval. "Martinez, your group is the first to arrive with all members intact. What happened out there?" Marcus, to his credit, spoke up. "She led us. When I got sick, she took over navigation and got us here safely." Back at the facility, something shifted, not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly. Chen started sitting with Sarah during meals, asking her questions about tactics and strategy. One of the other recruits from her wilderness group mentioned her fire-building skills to others. Small moments of acknowledgement that she had earned, not through strength or size, but through knowledge, preparation, and clear thinking under pressure. But the mockery hadn't disappeared entirely. Many recruits still saw her success as a fluke, a one-time occurrence in a controlled training exercise. The real test, they whispered, would come later, when things got really difficult, When the pressure was truly on, she would crack like everyone else who didn't fit the mold. Sarah heard these whispers and said nothing. She simply continued to train, to study, to prepare. She knew that words meant nothing. Only results mattered, and the ultimate test was still ahead. By the 4th month of training, the original group of 50 recruits had dwindled to 23. The program had lived up to its reputation for breaking people, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Sarah had survived every challenge thrown at her, but she knew the hardest part was approaching. The final evaluation was whispered about in hushed tones. A mysterious test that changed each year, designed to push recruits to their absolute breaking point. Commander Blake called them all together one cold morning in late autumn. The air had a bite to it now, and frost covered the training grounds. "You've made it further than most," he began, his breath visible in the cold air. "You've proven you can endure physical hardship. You've shown you can think tactically, but there's one quality we haven't fully tested yet. The ability to function when everything goes wrong, when your plans fall apart, when you're isolated and have to make life or death decisions alone." He paused, letting his words sink in. "In 2 weeks you will face the final evaluation. You'll be given a mission. A real mission with real stakes. I can't tell you more than that, but I can tell you this. Not all of you will pass. Some of you will fail because you lack the necessary skills. Some will fail because you panic. And some will fail because, despite everything you've learned, you still don't understand what it really means to be part of this program." The 2 weeks that followed were the most intense preparation Sarah had ever experienced. The instructors drilled them relentlessly on everything they had learned. Navigation in extreme conditions, advanced combat techniques, emergency medical procedures, survival in hostile environments, communication protocols and encryption, how to blend in, how to gather intelligence, how to extract information from unwilling sources. Sarah threw herself into the preparation with single-minded focus. She studied until her eyes burned and her head ached. She practiced her combat moves until her muscles trembled with exhaustion. She ran the obstacle course in the dark, memorizing every handhold and foothold. While other recruits used their free time to relax or socialize, Sarah was in the library, reading case studies of past operations, analyzing what went right and what went wrong. One evening, Shen found her there, surrounded by maps and reports. "You're going to burn yourself out," he said, sitting down across from her. "You need to rest sometimes." Sarah looked up from the map she was studying. "I need to be ready. I can't afford to mess this up." "None of us can," Chen agreed. "But you've already proven yourself, Sarah. You're better prepared than half the people here." "Better prepared than half isn't good enough," Sarah said quietly. "I need to be better than everyone. Because if I'm not, they'll say I only made it this far because the instructors went easy on me or because I got lucky. I can't just be good enough. I have to be excellent." Chen studied her for a moment. "Is that what this is really about? Proving something to them?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. "Maybe it started that way," she finally admitted. "But now it's about proving something to myself, that I belong here, that I earned this." The night before the final evaluation, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, going over everything she had learned, every technique, every procedure. She thought about how far she had come, from that first day when she could barely finish the morning run to now, when she could keep pace with almost anyone in the program. She thought about all the times she had wanted to quit, all the moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion. At dawn, Commander Blake assembled the remaining recruits. There were 21 of them now. 2 more had dropped out during the intense preparation period. They stood in formation, their faces serious, the tension almost visible in the cold morning air. "Here's your mission," Commander Blake said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent group. "Intelligence indicates that a hostile group is holding 3 civilians in a compound approximately 60 miles from here. The terrain is mountainous and heavily forested. The weather forecast shows a storm system moving in within the next 48 hours. You will be dropped in teams of 3, each taking a different approach route. Your objective is to gather intelligence on the compound, identify the exact location of the hostages, and develop an extraction plan. This is a reconnaissance mission only. You are not to engage the enemy or attempt rescue. Is that clear?" They all nodded. Sarah felt her heart racing. This was real, or as real as a training exercise could be. The instructors would be playing the role of hostiles, But the environment, the challenges, the need for stealth and intelligence gathering, all of that would be genuine. The teams were announced. Sarah found herself paired with two recruits she had barely worked with before. Roberts, a tall man who had been consistently near the top of the physical training rankings, and Diaz, a quieter recruit who was known for his technical skills and map-reading abilities. They had 1 hour to plan their approach before the helicopter departure. Roberts immediately took charge of the planning session, spreading out their maps on a table. "We'll take the eastern approach," he said, tracing a route with his finger. "It's the most direct path to the compound." Sarah studied the map carefully. "The eastern approach is also the most obvious. If this were a real operation, that's where the enemy would expect an approach from. They'd have it monitored or even trapped." Roberts looked annoyed. "It's also the fastest route. We have limited time before that storm hits. Speed matters. Speed without security is just recklessness," Sarah countered. "What if we approach from the west instead? It's more difficult terrain, but there's better cover and it's less likely to be watched." Diaz had been quiet, studying both routes. Sarah's right about the eastern approach being obvious, but she's also right that the western route is harder. "What if we compromise? Take a northern route that splits the difference. Reasonably good cover, not too obvious, manageable terrain." After some debate, they agreed on Diaz's suggestion. They packed their gear carefully, checking and double-checking their supplies. Sarah made sure to include extra water purification tablets, a detailed first aid kit, and backup navigation tools. Roberts noticed her extensive preparations and smirked. "Planning to carry the whole supply room?" "Planning to be prepared for anything," Sarah replied evenly. The helicopter ride was tense and silent. Sarah watched through the window as they flew over the mountains, studying the terrain, noting landmarks, thinking about their route. When they were dropped at their insertion point, the reality of the mission hit her. They were alone now, 60 miles from the compound. With 48 hours before the storm hit and their window for gathering intelligence closed. They moved carefully through the forest. Roberts in the lead, Diaz in the middle monitoring their position, and Sarah taking rear security, watching for any signs of pursuit or surveillance. The first day passed without incident, but progress was slower than Roberts wanted. He kept pushing for a faster pace, and Sarah kept cautioning patience. By the evening of the first day, they had covered about 30 miles. They made camp in a well-hidden spot, taking turns on watch. Sarah took the midnight shift, sitting quietly in the darkness, listening to every sound in the forest. She heard Roberts and Diaz talking in low voices before they fell asleep. "Think she'll make it?" Roberts asked. "She's made it this far," Diaz replied. "She's tougher than she looks." "Maybe," Roberts said. "But this is different. This is the real test. When things go bad, and they will go bad because they always do in these final evaluations, that's when we'll see what she's really made of." Sarah said nothing, but their words stayed with her through the long, cold night. They were right about one thing. Something would go wrong. The instructors designed these exercises to throw unexpected challenges at the recruits. The question wasn't if something would go wrong, but when and how they would respond. As dawn broke over the mountains and they prepared to move out on their second day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was just beginning. The second day began with a sense of urgency. They had roughly 25 more miles to cover before reaching observation distance of the compound, and the weather was already changing. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of approaching rain. Sarah checked her watch repeatedly, calculating their pace, their remaining distance, their shrinking time window. Around midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked a valley. Diaz pulled out his map to confirm their position, but his face fell as he studied the terrain ahead. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "The route we planned goes through that valley, but look at it." They all looked down. The valley floor was open terrain with minimal cover. Even worse, they could see clear signs of activity. There were tracks, recent ones, suggesting regular patrols through the area. Taking their planned route would almost certainly result in detection. Roberts swore under his breath. "We don't have time to go around." The valley route was already the compromise. "If we detour now, we'll never make it to the compound before the storm hits." Sarah studied the terrain carefully through her binoculars. "What if we don't go through the valley at all? Look at that ridgeline to the north. It's higher and more exposed, but it runs parallel to the valley. We could follow it and bypass the patrol zone entirely." "That ridge is completely exposed," Roberts argued. No trees, no cover. If anyone looks up, they'll spot us immediately. Only during the day, Sarah pointed out. But if we wait here until dusk, we could move along the ridge in darkness. It's riskier in terms of navigation, but safer in terms of avoiding detection. Diaz considered both options. Waiting until dusk means we lose 4 hours. We'd have to move fast and in the dark. But Roberts is right that the ridge is exposed, and Sarah's right that the valley is probably being patrolled. They debated for another 20 minutes, voices rising as frustration built. Finally, Roberts made the decision. We go through the valley. We'll move carefully, use what cover there is, and if we spot a patrol, we'll hide and let them pass. We can't afford to wait 4 hours. Sarah disagreed strongly, but Roberts was the unofficial team leader, and they were running out of time to argue. They descended into the valley, moving slowly from cover to cover. The tension was unbearable. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow could be an enemy patrol. They were halfway across the valley when Sarah heard it. Voices coming from the east, moving in their direction. She immediately signaled the others to take cover. They dove behind a cluster of large rocks just as a patrol of 4 instructors, playing the role of hostile forces, came into view. The patrol moved methodically, searching the area with practiced efficiency. Sarah's heart pounded as she pressed herself against the cold stone, barely breathing. She could hear Roberts's heavy breathing beside her, could sense his panic building. The patrol was coming closer, would pass within 20 feet of their hiding spot. One of the instructors stopped, looking in their direction. Sarah's hand moved slowly to the signal device on her belt, the one they could use to call for emergency extraction if the situation became truly dangerous. But calling for extraction meant automatic failure of the exercise. They would all be out of the program. The instructor took a step toward their position, then another. Sarah could see his face now, could see him scanning the rocks where they hid. Her mind raced through options. They could try to run, but they'd be easily caught in the open valley. They could try to fight, but that would violate the rules of the exercise and result in failure. They could call for extraction, but that meant giving up, or they could stay perfectly still and hope the instructor didn't spot them. The moment stretched out, feeling like hours, though it was probably only seconds. Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. Beside her, she could sense Robert starting to panic, his breathing getting faster. If he bolted or made a sound, they would all be caught. Slowly, carefully, Sarah reached out and placed her hand on Robert's arm, a gentle but firm pressure. A reminder to stay calm, stay still, stay quiet. She could feel him trembling under her touch, but he didn't move. The instructor was now less than 10 feet away. He looked directly at the rocks where they hid, and Sarah was certain he had seen them. This was it, they were caught. But then the instructor's radio crackled with a message. Patrol 2, return to base. Storm's coming in faster than expected. All units pull back. The instructor responded, took one more look at their hiding spot, then turned and rejoined his patrol. They moved off to the west, their voices fading into the distance. Sarah, Roberts, and Diaz remained frozen for another 5 minutes, waiting to be absolutely certain the patrol was gone. When they finally moved, Roberts was shaking. That was too close, he whispered. We should have waited and taken the ridge route like you suggested. They continued through the valley without further incident, but the close call had shaken Roberts badly. He had always relied on his physical strength and confidence, but stealth operations required different skills. Mental discipline, patience, the ability to control fear and panic. Sarah realized that for all his physical prowess, Roberts had never really been tested in a situation where strength didn't matter. As predicted, the storm hit that evening. The rain came down in sheets, turning the ground to mud and reducing visibility to almost nothing. They found shelter in a small cave and waited out the worst of it. According to their timeline, they needed to reach observation distance of the compound by dawn the next morning, which meant they would have to travel through the night in the storm. Diaz checked their navigation equipment and discovered another problem. His GPS device had gotten wet during the storm and was malfunctioning. They had the map and compass as backup, but navigating in darkness and rain with just those tools would be extremely difficult. I can do it, Sarah said quietly. I've practiced navigation in bad conditions. I can get us there. Roberts looked doubtful, but he was still shaken from the earlier close call. Are you sure? I'm sure, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. The truth was, navigating in these conditions was incredibly difficult, but she had spent countless hours practicing exactly this scenario. While other recruits had relaxed during their free time, she had been out in the training areas practicing navigation in rain, in darkness, in fog. She had memorized terrain features, learned to read the subtle signs of the landscape, trained herself to maintain direction even when visibility was nearly zero. They set out into the storm. The rain was cold and relentless, the darkness almost complete. Sarah led the way, stopping frequently to check her compass, to study the map by the dim light of her flashlight, to confirm landmarks when lightning briefly illuminated the landscape. Each step was deliberate, calculated. One mistake, one wrong turn, and they could end up miles off course with no time to correct. Roberts and Diaz followed her in silence, trusting her judgment. Hours passed in this way, slow and exhausting, every mile feeling like 10. Sarah's body ached with fatigue, her eyes strained from peering into the darkness, but she pushed forward. She had to get them to the objective. This was what she had trained for, prepared for, studied for. As dawn approached, the rain finally began to ease. Sarah checked their position one more time, comparing the terrain features to her map. According to her calculations, they were less than half a mile from the observation point. They had made it, navigating through one of the worst storms of the season, arriving exactly where they needed to be, and exactly when they needed to be there. They climbed to a high point overlooking the compound. Through their binoculars, they could see the target building, could observe the patrol patterns, could identify potential entry and exit points. They spent the next 4 hours gathering intelligence, taking detailed notes, photographing everything they could. When it was time to call for extraction, Roberts looked at Sarah with genuine respect. "You got us here," he said simply. "Through the storm in the dark with broken equipment. You actually did it." The helicopter picked them up at the designated extraction point. On the flight back to the facility, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They had completed the mission successfully. She had proven she could lead under pressure, could navigate in impossible conditions, could make the hard decisions when they needed to be made. But as they approached the facility, she saw something that made her heart sink. Emergency vehicles lined the landing area. Medical personnel were rushing around. Commander Blake stood near the command center, his face grim. Something had gone wrong with one of the other teams, badly wrong. As they landed and climbed out of the helicopter, Sarah heard the whispers among the ground crew. A team had gotten into serious trouble, and a rescue operation was underway. Commander Blake gathered all the return teams immediately. His face was gray with worry, and when he spoke, his usual commanding tone was strained with barely controlled emotion. "One of our teams activated their emergency beacon 4 hours ago. Team 7. They were supposed to be approaching the compound from the southern route. We lost communication with them shortly after the beacon activation. A rescue helicopter was dispatched, but had to turn back due to the storm conditions. The weather has cleared enough now for another attempt, but we're dealing with a serious situation." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Team 7 consisted of 3 recruits she knew well. Marcus, who had recovered from his illness during the wilderness exercise. Jackson, who had eventually come to respect her abilities. And Anderson, a quiet but capable recruit who had always been kind to her. The thought of them in danger made her feel sick. "The beacon signal is coming from a ravine approximately 15 miles southeast of the compound," Blake continued. "It's rough terrain, steep slopes, dense forest. The storm caused several landslides in that area. We don't know the exact condition of the team members, but the fact that they activated the beacon suggests serious injury or inability to move." He paused, looking at each of the returned recruits. "I need volunteers for a ground rescue team. The helicopter will drop you as close as possible, but you'll likely have to hike several miles through difficult terrain to reach them. You'll be going into an area that just experienced a major storm, where the ground is unstable and there could be additional slides. This is not part of the evaluation. This is a real rescue operation. If you volunteer, you do so knowing the risks." Every hand went up. Despite the exhaustion, despite the danger, these recruits had trained together, suffered together, and the idea of leaving teammates in danger was unthinkable. Commander Blake's expression softened slightly at the sight. "I can only take 6, he said. "I need people who are fresh, capable, and qualified in emergency medicine." His eyes scanned the group and landed on Sarah. "Martinez, you just completed a successful mission in terrible conditions. You've proven your navigation abilities. I want you on this team." Sarah nodded immediately, adrenaline pushing away her exhaustion. Blake selected 5 others, including Chen and Roberts from various teams. They had 15 minutes to gather rescue equipment, medical supplies, and prepare for departure. In the equipment room, Sarah packed her gear with practiced efficiency. Extra rope, climbing equipment, a comprehensive medical kit, water, emergency rations, and communication devices. Roberts was beside her, doing the same. "You saved our mission out there," he said quietly. "Maybe you can save theirs too." The helicopter flight was tense. Commander Blake briefed them on what little they knew. Team 7 had been moving through a steep section when the storm hit. They had reported difficult conditions and had been attempting to find shelter when communication was lost. The emergency beacon suggested they were in trouble, but gave no details about injuries or the exact nature of their situation. The helicopter pilot brought them as close as possible to the beacon's location, but the terrain was too unstable for a landing. They had to rappel down into a clearing about 3 miles from the signal. The moment Sarah's feet hit the ground, she was in motion, checking her GPS, orienting herself to the terrain, planning their approach route. The landscape was a disaster. The storm had been even worse in this area than where Sarah's team had sheltered. Trees were down everywhere. The ground was torn up by mudslides, and small streams had become raging torrents. Every step had to be chosen carefully to avoid unstable ground that could give way. Sarah took point, navigating through the chaos. She had studied the maps of this region during her preparation, memorizing the terrain features, the elevation changes, the potential hazards. That knowledge was crucial now as she led the team around dangerous areas, finding stable paths through the destruction. They had been hiking for about an hour when they heard it. A faint call for help, barely audible over the sound of rushing water and wind through the trees. Sarah immediately changed direction, moving toward the sound, the others following close behind. They found Team 7 at the bottom of a ravine. A massive landslide had swept down the slope, and the 3 recruits had been caught in it. Marcus was conscious, but his leg was clearly broken, the bone visible through torn fabric and skin. Jackson had a severe head injury, blood matting his hair, and he was only semi-conscious. Anderson seemed the least injured but was exhausted and hypothermic, barely able to speak coherently. Sarah immediately took charge, her medical training kicking in automatically. "Chen, stabilize Marcus's leg. Roberts, check Jackson's head injury and keep him still in case of spinal damage. I'll assess Anderson and set up a shelter." She worked quickly and efficiently, checking Anderson's vital signs, wrapping him in emergency blankets, getting warm fluids into him. The others followed her instructions without question. There was no time for egos or doubts now. Lives were at stake. Marcus was in severe pain but stable once his leg was splinted. The real concern was Jackson. His head injury was serious and he was showing signs of a concussion or worse. He needed to get to a hospital as soon as possible. Sarah pulled out the satellite phone and contacted Commander Blake. "We've located Team 7. 1 critical head injury requiring immediate evacuation. 1 serious leg fracture, 1 case of severe hypothermia. The ravine is too narrow for helicopter extraction. We need to carry them to a suitable landing zone." Blake's voice crackled back. "Nearest safe LZ is 2 miles north of your position. Can you make it?" Sarah looked at her team, at the injured recruits, at the unstable terrain around them. 2 miles through this landscape while carrying injured people would be incredibly difficult and dangerous. But staying here wasn't an option. Jackson needed medical attention now. "We can make it," Sarah said with certainty she didn't entirely feel. They fashioned stretchers from emergency materials and rope. Marcus could be helped to walk with support despite the pain. Anderson was recovering with warmth and fluids but was still weak. Jackson had to be carried on a stretcher, and moving him without worsening his injuries required extreme care. Sarah plotted their route carefully, choosing the safest path even though it was longer. Every decision mattered now. One mistake, one moment of carelessness could result in further injuries or worse. She led them slowly, methodically, constantly assessing the terrain ahead, warning of hazards, adjusting their route when necessary. The 2 miles took 3 hours. Every step was exhausting, every minute filled with tension. Sarah's legs trembled with fatigue. Her arms ached from helping carry equipment and supporting Marcus when he stumbled. But she never stopped, never slowed, never showed the doubt that gnawed at her. Halfway to the landing zone, they reached a stream that had been swollen by the storm into a dangerous, fast-moving river. There was no way around it. They would have to cross, and crossing with injured people would be extremely hazardous. Sarah studied the river, looking for the best crossing point. She remembered what she had learned during the survival training, how to read the water, where currents were strongest, where the bottom would be most stable. She found a spot where the river widened slightly, making it shallower and slower, though still dangerous. "We'll cross in pairs," she instructed. "Use the rope as a safety line. Strong swimmers support the injured. Take it slow and careful." They crossed one pair at a time. Sarah went first with Anderson, testing the route, confirming it was safe. Then Roberts and Chen brought Marcus across. Finally, the stretcher with Jackson was carefully maneuvered through the water, with multiple people supporting it to keep it stable and prevent it from being swept downstream. When they all reached the far bank, Sarah allowed herself one moment to breathe, to acknowledge how close they had come to disaster. Then she was moving again, leading them the final mile to the landing zone. The helicopter was waiting when they arrived. Medical personnel immediately took Jackson, loading him carefully and beginning treatment before the helicopter even lifted off. A second helicopter arrived for Marcus and Anderson. Commander Blake was there, watching as his injured recruits were evacuated, his face showing the strain of the past few hours. When the helicopters had departed, he turned to Sarah and the rescue team. "You saved their lives," he said simply. "If you hadn't reached them when you did, if you hadn't gotten them out safely, we could have lost all three." He looked directly at Sarah. "Martinez, you led that rescue. You made the critical decisions, chose the routes, got everyone out safely. That's what this program is really about. Not just surviving yourself, but having the skills and the courage to bring others home." Sarah was too exhausted to fully process his words. She had operated on pure adrenaline and training for the past several hours, and now that the crisis was over, the exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. But as they flew back to the facility, she realized something had changed. The other members of the rescue team looked at her differently now. Not with mockery or doubt, but with respect and trust. She had proven herself in the most real way possible, not in a training exercise, but in an actual life or death situation. The week following the rescue was strange. The final evaluation was technically still ongoing for the teams that had completed their missions. But the rescue operation had changed something fundamental in the atmosphere of the training facility. Jackson remained in the hospital with a serious concussion, but was expected to make a full recovery. Marcus was in surgery to repair his leg. Anderson had been treated for hypothermia and released after 2 days. Commander Blake made the decision to conclude the final evaluation based on the missions already completed and the performance during the rescue operation. The remaining recruits gathered in the main hall 3 days after the incident, unsure what to expect. Blake stood before them, his expression serious, but no longer grim. "You came here 6 months ago as individuals," he began. 50 people, each thinking they were the best, the strongest, the smartest. This program broke you down and built you back up, not as individuals, but as operatives capable of functioning as part of something larger than yourselves. He paused, looking at each face in the room. "Some of you came in with obvious physical advantages, size, strength, speed. Some came in with technical skills or intelligence. Some came in with confidence and bravado. But over these 6 months, you've learned that none of those things alone are enough. What separates a good operative from an exceptional one isn't any single quality. It's the combination of skills, the mental toughness to keep going when everything says quit, and the judgment to make the right decisions when the stakes are highest." Sarah stood at attention, her heart pounding. She knew what was coming, but still couldn't quite believe it. 18 of you successfully completed your mission objectives," Blake continued. "That alone is an impressive accomplishment. But 3 of you demonstrated something beyond mission completion. You showed the kind of leadership, adaptability, and decision-making that defines excellence in this field." He called 3 names. Chen, who had successfully led his team through an unexpected equipment failure and still completed the mission. Roberts, who had overcome his initial panic during the Valley Patrol encounter and performed admirably during the rescue. And Sarah Martinez, Blake said, and Sarah stepped forward. "You came into this program as the least likely candidate. You were smaller. You lacked the physical presence that many assume is necessary for this work. You were mocked, dismissed, and underestimated. But you proved that the mind is more powerful than the muscle, that preparation matters more than size, and that real courage isn't about never feeling fear, but about functioning effectively despite it. He looked directly at her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Pride. You completed your mission in worse conditions than any other team faced. You navigated through a storm that should have made progress impossible. And then, when your fellow recruits were in danger, you led a rescue operation through unstable terrain and brought them all home safely. You are hereby awarded top honors for this training cycle. The room erupted in applause. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, unable to fully process what had just happened. Roberts was clapping loudly, a genuine smile on his face. Chen gave her a thumbs up. Even recruits who had barely spoken to her during the entire program were applauding. After the ceremony, as they collected their graduation materials and prepared to receive their first assignments, several people approached Sarah. Marcus, on crutches but mobile, made his way over. I would have died in that ravine, he said quietly. We all would have if you hadn't known how to navigate through that mess and get us out. I'm sorry for how I treated you during wilderness training. I was wrong about you. Jackson, released from the hospital just that morning, came to thank her as well. They told me you were the one who assessed my injury and made the call to get me out fast. The doctor said another hour or two and I might have had permanent brain damage. So thank you for saving my life. Even some of the instructors sought her out to offer congratulations. They had seen countless recruits come through the program over the years. They said, but few had demonstrated the combination of intelligence, determination, and grace under pressure that Sarah had shown. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings to prepare for her first assignment, Commander Blake found her in her quarters. I wanted to talk to you privately, he said, sitting down across from her. I owe you an apology. Sarah looked up in surprise. Sir? That first day when I looked at you standing in that training room, I doubted whether you belonged here, Blake admitted. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I let myself fall into the trap of judging based on appearance. I thought you'd be gone in a week. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for that. You weren't the only one who doubted me, Sarah said. And honestly, I doubted myself plenty of times. But you never quit, Blake noted. Even when it would have been easier, even when you had every reason to walk away, you stayed. That's rare. Physical gifts are common. Mental toughness is rare. The ability to continue learning and adapting while under extreme stress is even rarer. He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. Your first assignment. It's a challenging one, but I specifically requested you for this team. The mission requires someone who can think clearly under pressure, who can navigate through chaos, and who won't panic when plans fall apart. Based on what I've seen, you're perfect for it. Sarah opened the folder and read the brief. It was indeed challenging. A long-term intelligence gathering operation in a region known for political instability and danger. The team would be small, operating independently for months at a time. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes mission she had trained for. One more thing, Blake said as he stood to leave. Leadership isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. It's about being the one people trust when everything is falling apart. You earned that trust. Don't forget that. After he left, Sarah sat alone in her room for a long time, thinking about the journey she had been on. 6 months ago, she had walked into this program terrified that she didn't belong, that she would fail, that everyone who had doubted her would be proven right. She had endured mockery, exclusion, and constant questioning of her abilities. But she had also learned something crucial. Other people's doubts didn't define her. Their mockery didn't diminish her. She had proven that excellence comes in many forms, that strength isn't just physical, and that the ability to think clearly when chaos reigns is worth more than any amount of muscle. The final irony wasn't lost on her. Team 7, the team that had run into trouble and needed rescue, had included some of the physically strongest recruits in the program. They had relied on their strength and confidence, and when the situation exceeded those qualities, they had been helpless. Meanwhile, Sarah, the one everyone had expected to fail first, had been the one to bring them home. As she finished packing and prepared for sleep before her departure the next day, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She hadn't just survived the program. She had excelled. She had earned the respect of her peers and instructors through her actions, not her words. And most importantly, she had proven to herself that she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning, as she prepared to leave for her first assignment, Sarah took one last look at the training facility that had transformed her. Other graduates were saying emotional goodbyes, taking pictures, exchanging contact information. Sarah simply shouldered her pack and walked toward the waiting vehicle. Chen caught up with her at the gate. "Hey, we'll probably end up working together again," he said. "These teams rotate and cross paths all the time." "I hope so," Sarah replied honestly. "You were one of the few people who gave me a chance from the beginning." "I gave you a chance because you earned it," Chen corrected. "You know what the instructors are saying? They're saying this training cycle will be remembered as the one where the smallest recruit taught everyone the biggest lesson, that the measure of an operative isn't in their size or strength, but in their ability to adapt, to think, and to lead when it matters most." As the vehicle pulled away from the facility, Sarah looked back one final time. She thought about that first day standing at the back of the training room, invisible among the larger recruits. She thought about all the times she had been dismissed, mocked, underestimated, and she thought about the final evaluation, where she had been the one to complete the mission successfully and then lead the rescue that saved 3 lives. They had mocked her in training. They had doubted she would last a week. But when the mission failed and lives were on the line, she had been the only one capable of bringing everyone home, not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she had prepared when others relaxed, learned when others assumed they knew enough, and stayed calm when others panicked. As the facility disappeared behind her and the road ahead opened up toward her first real mission, Sarah Martinez understood something fundamental. She had entered the program trying to prove she belonged. She was leaving it knowing with absolute certainty that she did. The journey ahead would bring new challenges, new doubts from others who would underestimate her. But she had learned the most important lesson of all. Her worth wasn't determined by others' output.